just to explain, many people who go to these temples, they don't figure out what these inscriptions are, because if you don't know the local language, or if you haven't studied much, you don't have a guide who explains it to you, you really wouldn't know, because there's just the male employees or people who benefited. There were temple servants. These are dancing masters, musicians, drummers, singers, accountants, parasol bearers, lamp lighters, watermen, potters, washermen, barbers, astrologers, tailors, carpenters, goldsmith. There are so many that you see. Now, why are they carved in the temple? I will let the author explain that. These are the people who are actually working around that temple. So, for people who think that it's only pilgrims who go and they put a little bit in the hundi and that's the employment activity that happens around a temple. No, there's a lot more that happens. Please explain to us about this.
Yeah, so let's take the Brihadishwara temple, right, which is probably the most famous among what we're talking about. So when you go to the Brihadishwara temple, on the sides of the temple, right, there are most of these inscriptions are all on the sides, right? There's a sort of a lighting that you see, but of course the script is in ancient language, but much for people who are interested, a lot of these inscriptions are all digitized, right? So you could just do a Google search and try to find them online, and what they do is, you see, they reflect a sort of they provide you a perspective of how people live their lives. And the fascinating thing is there's due credit given for everyone, right? It's not like, it's done in a very coherent, sort of sophisticated way. For example, most of the inscriptions start off with a sort of a eulogy to praise, even the kings praise, Lord Shiva, and then go on to talk about some of their activities, how some of these loans were given.
There are some places where there is even a small shrine for the architect.
Correct, yeah.
That's the respect for even that.
Correct. And imagine, right, they had the foresight to do this thousands of years ago because they probably realized that this was something that will be eternal. Despite, whatever natural calamity happens over a period of time. The fact that we are discussing about this today is because of that foresight and an ability to sort of, put this in these inscriptions. Which, again, these inscriptions, we need to view it in a much wider perspective, right? Because in general, for economic history or economic history research, I take a sort of a triangular approach. One is what you call, real data, right? What is the real data that is available? Again, data going back thousands of years is a bit sketchy, but there are some data points that are available, right? So that is sort of the data side. The second is what I call secondary research, right? Which is what your inscriptions across board. What is the overall message that these inscriptions provide, right? In terms of trends, in terms of analysis, in terms of principles, because most of them are sort of prescriptive. They will say that, this king gave this much to this person and this person benefited, he provided a loan to this person and whatever it is, right? But you have to find the underlying message or theme across these inscriptions to derive a sort of a framework. So the secondary research provides you a lot of, content for that. Last part of it is what I call anecdotal research, right? You have a lot of these travelers during these times, who talk about a lot of these empires in various, travelogues. For example, The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea is a very popular book. There's a Chinese embassy notes. The Cholas, when they sent missionaries to China, and there are embassy notes which talk about this. And then there are travelogues by Greek travelers, Chinese travelers, who talk about, these are all independent people who just travel across the country.
Who mentioned that there are craftsmen, artists, singers,
Correct.
construction workers, cooks, all these people employed in areas around the temple.
Correct. So this is what...
It happens even till today.
Correct.
There
Correct.
are the dhabas.
Correct.
There are the Vaishno dhabas. There are the other dhabas.
Right.
There are medicine shops. There are, activities, economic activities which were not there
Correct.
earlier.
And just to close that point, right? So the triangulation of research is very important, right? Because you can't just look at one data point and then make an assessment of it, right? So, for example, if you take the Padmanabha Swami temple, the amount of treasure and wealth that has been there in the temple is huge in terms of even contemporary, GDP and GDP per capita. So, using just the data points does not give you, because the lack of veracity of data is not the way to approach it, in my view. So it has to be a sort of triangulation, which I talk about, which then gives you a sophisticated overlying picture of what led them to be sustainable. See, the fascinating thing about this entire exercise is we are talking about at least 2,500 to 5,000 years, right? Which means, within a span of 100 years, we are seeing so many geopolitical changes. The idea of a nation state, so many structural changes to the way we live. Imagine 2,500 or even, more than that, right? Which means there are certain concepts which are sort of eternally sort of ensured the sustainability of some of these systems. And that again is eventually boils down to what I define as the way of life. Because most of, even in our contemporary, spending, let's take discretionary and non-discretionary spending, right? Non-discretionary is something that you have to do for day to day, right? For health, for, those things that you cannot avoid. Then there's a discretionary spending, right? Which spending that you make out of your own choice. Sort of, I would say, luxury items. Most of the discretionary spending is linked some form or the other to your cultural, activities or cultural ecosystem in some form or the other. For example, if you want to buy a clothing, right? Most of you do it either during, say, a Diwali or during some other major festival, right? If you look at the UPI transactions, even today, most of this during the festival period, cyclically, really, the transactions are much higher. Which means that what I'm trying to say is for the discretionary part of it, we still use
festivals,
the cultural ecosystem as sort of a driver of our decision making, right?
Yeah.
And that extends to even economic choices that we make everywhere else, right? And in the case of India, in Bharat, this is far higher propensity than in other countries.
Isn't it the same in the Western nations? Christmas is where most of the sales happen. If you see globally also, diamond jewelry, diamonds, sale of diamonds, that happens at that time. Big purchases of land and all happens at that time. Acquisition happens at that time.
Right, definitely. But the fact that through the year we have so many festivals and so many sort of
okay.
Ours is, at least the Bharatiya sort of
is not one festival. Okay.
Correct. It's sort of across the year. And in the West, see, the amusing thing is that in the West, people have done a lot of research on this. Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Prize for economics, started some of his work on some of these, on the role of cultural discrimination and things like that. George Eckleroff, who won the Nobel Prize in 2001 on asymmetric information, he's done work on identity economics, right? On the role of identity and society and culture, and the role of norms and narratives in economic decision making. So what I'm trying to say is this is not some niche topic. There's a lot of contemporary research which is done outside Bharat, but unfortunately we are the cradle of cultural civilization, and one of the attempts here is to also sort of establish a qualitative framework which tries to give you a perspective of what this way of life is. Because if this way of life, which is proportional or has a lot of significant correlation with our economic decision making, can be studied further, then it can also make policy far more effective, right? If you're able to sort of understand this a bit more. Say, for example, the Mahakumbh is happening. So the Mahakumbh will have the greatest, largest, I think, congregation of people across probably the world at one point of time. So this is a great sample size for you to, if there is any policy narrative, say, for example, either the Swachhata initiative or other initiatives, it's a huge sort of opportunity to sort of project your message and get it across to people using the cultural sort of narrative as a positive driver to enable greater policy effectiveness. Then, because the way of life is a thousands of years entity, right? You don't need the state to come and tell you how to do these things. You do it because you are living. Your cultural background provides you the impetus to do it, right? So it's not like some external entity is coming and telling you to do it, right? So it's a natural way of life. So if policy can be aligned to this natural way of life rather than the other way around, where a bunch of people sitting in Lutyens' Delhi, tell you for what to do, and the people have to adjust their lives to that. You rather have it the other way around. Then it becomes far more effective. Yeah. Because you're aligning to what the people are naturally sort of aligned.
Do subscribe to the ANI Clips channel to get shorter versions of this podcast. Click here to watch the full episode.